Yes, welcome to the Square D GAA Tactics and Analysis podcast with your host here, Paddy McGill, and the brains behind the operation, Mr. Stephen O'Mara. So, just a brief outlay. We'll be focusing on two matches that were aired over any given weekend in the Allianz National Football League. Before all of that, though, so this week we're going to be looking at Meath Cork, that clash in Division 2, and of course that pulsating battle in Castlebar on Saturday night between Western rivals Galway and Mayo. Before all that, though, let's have a quick chat with the main man. I call you the brains behind the operation. Stephen, just briefly, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, look, probably football my life. I would have been a coach and a manager for many of the seasons from the time I was 18. I was managing college football teams and hurling teams. Started as an analyst, actually, to analyse my own teams that I coached and managed. And I suppose after a good few years out of the GA, actually, I fell back into it. And one thing led to the other. And next thing, I was back analysing, working with county football teams predominantly, and then back into coaching and managing at club level and whatnot. So I fell in. I ended up working as the analyst for the Galway footballers in 18 and 19. Then Donegal footballers 21 and 22. And in between, randomly, I ended up coaching the Carlow senior football team and pre-COVID with Turlock O'Brien as manager. And I'm managing a team down there now in Carlow.
So will we call you a manager / coach or a managing coach or somewhere in between maybe?
Yeah, I suppose technically I'm the manager at the moment, but I'm essentially the head coach and general dog's body, I suppose. Did a lot of coaching. I suppose probably was never a head coach, and I'm maybe too headstrong not to be the head coach, and I ended up being manager. So I end up. I was going to end up with the dirty jerseys, but I don't. But yeah, a managing coach, you could say.
Okay, fair enough. So tell me, the Square D itself, the name, where does that actually come from?
I'd love to take credit for it myself, but it's a Donegal man's brainchild. Look, essentially, what are we trying to do here? Obviously, look, I've a lot of, I'm analysing this one professionally 5-6 years now, and another 3 or 4 years before that. And I suppose just the data, I've built my own software. I've got a lot of data, a lot of nuance comes off it. And it's just trying to get through that other layer, maybe that, as I say, you think you're looking at one thing, but when you scratch beneath the surface, maybe you've been looking at something else. And I suppose sometimes I'd watch a game live, do analysis afterwards, and then you go back and watch the game, and you're watching an absolutely different game from what you thought you had watched. So maybe if you haven't had too many points, you think you're looking at a square, maybe it's a D, who knows?
Yeah, that's why I always struggle with my own podcast. It's in the immediate aftermath of the match, and other people have watched the match a couple of times, and then you're like, it's just so instant. Great stuff. So look, we're just for our viewers and our listeners, just tell us again. So we're going to be looking at two matches every single weekend that were aired over any given Saturday or Sunday. Is that right?
That's the size of it, yeah. And I suppose, look, we'll see what the juicy matches are week by week. We'll probably announce it. We're going to chase our tails here. I've been doing more than one job here to get this ready the last few days. So chasing the tail a little bit, but in general, yeah, a couple of days out in advance. Hasn't helped that I'm locked out of my GA ProStats Twitter account where all my followers are. Yeah, generally speaking, we'll be 2 or 3 days out. We'll announce what games we're going to do. We'll all going well, have live stats going up, and then we'll further discuss them as the week or on the show on the Monday night.
Yeah, and that's what games we're going to do. You've already dissected two matches, and as I said, that Division 1 clash, we're going to be discussing that and going through it in part 2. But first, yesterday's game, Division 2, Colm Ruark's Meath travelling to the Rebel County, taking on Cork. Man, a lot of people fancy Cork maybe going into this one. You actually did fancy Cork from the outset yourself, Stephen, didn't you? Meath coming away, of course, with the points.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose I was expecting an absolute tale of two different styles, and we got that game of particular interest to me because obviously I worked with Kevin Walsh in Galway for 2 years as his analyst there, and I've coached and done a bit of analysis with two separate clubs in Meath. So it was of particular interest to me. And I suppose, look, at the outside, and coming full circle by chance, Meath played Carlow in the O'Byrne Cup, and one of the lads on my club fullback, I think it might have been his debut. We played cornerback that night, so I watched that on clubber.ie, and obviously Meath was mostly a second string team, whereas Carlow was probably 2/3, 3/4 of a full strength. But look, it was 1-5 to 3 points to Carlow at half time, and probably flattered Carlow a little bit, but defensively not really. And the big question for me, and I suppose I think it's safe to say, myself and Conor O'Rourke would probably be on the opposite spectrum of the philosophies of football. And I'm curious to see if he can prove me wrong or if he'll come around to my way of thinking. But certainly the first half that night against Carlow, what jumped out at me was the amount of ball that Meath were kicking, and they kick a lot of ball, and they have done. I don't think they've really stopped since they were winning All Ireland in the 80s and 90s. But they kicked a ferocious amount of ball into the Carlow sweeper in the first half. I didn't do post-match stats, but my guess was 7 out of 8 or 7 out of 9 straight in on top of a sweeper, and came out in the second half. And ultimately, the game changed. But Carlow were weakened and couldn't afford to be, I suppose. Killian O'Sullivan came on and ran riot in the second half. But crucially for me, he ran at Carlow as opposed to me trying to pick the lock with kick passes. And that's what changed the game. So I was curious to see how it would pan out.
Yeah, fair enough. So looking at this one, I know you have our first graph. It's the expected scores, etc. And as I said, I've briefly alluded to it already. You did fancy Cork going into this one, didn't you?
I did, yeah. And look, I'm going to say on that, all things being equal, as you'll see here from the expected score, Cork did produce more good chances, so to speak. And just to digress momentarily, so expected score is a term obviously analysts are very familiar with, but a lot of the people maybe watching tonight wouldn't be. So what it does is it accounts for the distance, but also the difficulty of every given shot. So, you'll often hear coaches now, I suppose, certainly post Jim Gavin, saying only 70%ers minimum. They don't want players hitting a shot that's lower than a 70%er. Now, the perception of what's a 70%er in your eyes and in my eyes might be very different. But what I've got a number of years of data which has averaged up to be correct. Now, I've actually tweaked that a little bit to make the software more efficient, essentially, in the last week. So I'm confident it's fairly close. But do bear with me. It's not beyond reason that there'll have to be a few tweaks made within a range of maybe 10% over the next few weeks. But broadly speaking, what it means. So, for example, I mean, if you're standing on the 45, no one's near you, you have a shot. Intercounty Division 1, it's there about a 50%er. Moderate pressure put on you in that situation, it's getting closer to a 30-35%er. If you're under high pressure there or kicking over blocking hands where you've actually the direct route to the goal is blocked, you have to put the ball up on a trajectory, that could be as low as maybe 15%. So essentially, it accounts for the difficulty of the shot. And as I say, to explain it, if I showed you a game and I paused before every shot, who would you think had won that game? And I suppose with that, moving back onto the Cork game here, the Cork Meath game, marginally Cork. But I suppose it was funny because my semi-expectation, which absolutely played out early on, was that Meath would potentially be kicking a lot of ball away into what I expected would be a highly structured Kevin Walsh defence. And it absolutely transpired that way. And Cork keeping the ball through the hands predominantly and having a lot more scores. And look, early on, and I watched the first 25 minutes live before I switched over to Donegal and Tyrone, but you can see here the summary chart of the game. This is taken after 16, 17 minutes. It's 6-1 to me to Cork. It's 6 points to 1 goal to Cork. Meath have had 8 phases of play and got 2 shots off 25%, which in modern football is terribly low. Cork are up 73%. So 70% is a gold standard on that, assuming you're not hitting ridiculous shots. That's your kind of Jim Gavin territory, I'm going to say, 70% plus. So Cork are at 78% shots. Meath are at 25. The score is 6 points to a goal, but the expected score is 5 points to 1.7 because Meath got exceptional goal by Shane Walsh, but essentially it was a difficult shot. There was nearly as much value fisted it over the bar. And at that point, not long before I turned off the TV, I'd have bet my life that Cork were going to win. And even as you move on, Meath kind of clawed their way back a little bit and got a few, again, have to point out, they did early on. I mean, they kicked 4 balls straight into a sweeper in the first 15 minutes. In fairness, that the goal came from 2 kick passes, but crucially, there was no sweeper in place. He was sort of trying to filter back. Exceptional goal, great pass, brilliant piece of play by Shane Walsh, who had an exceptional game. That's obviously the Meath Shane Walsh for anybody who would be confused. But and Shane sort of been expected to come big, I think, the last year or two in Meath, and I suppose he really announced himself maybe on a national stage there the last day. Super goal, but ultimately Cork seemed absolutely dominant. Meath got a great goal, got a super point then down the right. Again, one that I would say statistically bad news. Kicked it into Jordan Morris down the line with a sweeper behind him, but he managed to beat the cornerback and the sweeper point. But even at that point, you were looking here at 51, 52 minutes, and it's still looking to me like, Meath have 48 phases with shots, 48%. Cork have 68. It's 1-9 to 14. There's only 2 points in it, but I'm feeling Cork are in full control. And then bang, just one turnover and the game changed. And I suppose crucially there was a turnover in the first half when Cork were running away a little bit, and it got just outside the 45. Meath made a turnover, went in, scored, and the second goal straight off a turnover. And all of a sudden, you're looking at a game that Cork seemed to be coasting in, and before you knew it, Cork looked like they were coasting. Before you knew it, Meath were back in it, and then the oldest school goal in the book, long kick out a few minutes later. Caught it, handed off. Killian O'Sullivan, who was exceptional, I would say, is exceptional. Solo run. Took about 17 steps, but as lads who were less than 6 foot get away, he got away with it. And next thing you're looking, saying, Meath are 6 points up here. I don't know how this has happened.
Yeah, I think it's a rule at this stage maybe needs to be abandoned. I think referees just literally do not bother with the steps rule, because I saw it a lot myself in Ballybofey. So look, all said and done, but under the umbrella of stats and everything, somebody goes away, they have their cup of coffee, they come back a half an hour later. Meath are going up the road with 2 points, despite it looking so favourable for Cork. How and why did it turn on its head?
Well, again, I've left this chart on the screen for a reason, I suppose. For all this, there's 2 key factors in this. And I want to point out to the people with kind of mathematical brains, on the surface, these charts can look a little bit off, but you have to bear in mind there's more than one phase in some shot, more than one shot in some phases, and also we're taking a point as 100%. So when there's goal shots in there, it makes those percentages funny. I will give an explainer on Twitter and or Facebook in the next day or two. But crucially, look, okay, so Cork have obviously got 68% shots off at that stage of the game, but their expected score per shot is 59%, whereas Meath's is 66%. So it's Meath are creating better shots. And I suppose the point I'd make, and I suppose I digress. I said, I'm looking what happened. I've gone back, what did happen, turnover, whatnot. I suppose I like very controlled styles. I like consistency. I see a Cork there, 68%. I'm saying, yeah, well, they'll probably get that next week again. Whereas Meath's scoreline resulted in a few pieces of magic, few poor pieces of play by Cork. Now, if Colin O'Rourke would bother himself to come down from the mainstream media and watch this, he'd probably be sitting there thinking, would you listen to that Egypt from Dublin? He's talking numbers and figures. I've got 2 points in the bag. We're playing kicking football. We got our first goal off a brilliant kick pass. Next two, I think we'll run. They've won the game. And the point I make is when you do play that kicking game, look, you tend to have less phases with shots, but the ones you get do tend to be closer to goal or potentially goal shots 1-on-1. So ultimately, Colin O'Rourke can go home saying, I'm delighted with the kicking game. It won it for us, got a brilliant goal early on, got a couple of great scores like Jordan Morris got that brilliant point, got a few more like that. Ultimately, you know, not to take away from me, they won't care. They've 2 points in the bag. I think if the game was played 10 times, I'd expect Cork to win it, maybe 7. But the way it ran, you know, Meath, the opportunities were presented. Meath made 2 key turnovers. Got a point that kind of kept them in touch in the first half, goal to give them the lead in the second half. And, you know, away they go with 2 points in the bag.
Yeah, people will look at this, and I suppose it's important to lay this out on the first episode. People will say this, well, if it's not on, it's not on. But sometimes you get this magic or this creative forward who kicks a wonder score. They'll blame lads like you, Stephen, for maybe players not. The Stephen O'Mara's is everything that's wrong in the modern day, and there's thousands of you throughout the country. But you take my point.
I take your point 100%, and to some extent, I'll be falling on my own sword because of a very soccer based philosophy on the game. Now, listen, it depends what team you have. If you've got Kerry footballers, you can play Kerry football. If you go in and you're with a team who are in the bottom half and have been for the last 10 years, you know, is Kerry football really the way to go? Look, ultimately, you know, footballers win games. There's a lot of nuance, a lot of percentages. We'll get into it as the year goes on. I want to start with baby steps here. I have to just keep telling myself, keep it simple here, because concepts that are straightforward to me, because I've been looking at them on my laptop for the last 6 years. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, I suppose when you go back, again, Jim Gavin, it's probably hard not to mention him a few times when you have my kind of outlook on football, but ultimately they won 6 All-Irelands. You know, a brilliant team might win 3 or 4 out of 5, but to win 6 in a row, and again, you look at that, just shooting zone, not shooting under pressure, and ultimately it paid dividends.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I had to ask you that, but you do get a little bit of a pass on that because you're from Dublin. If you were maybe from Tyrone, Armagh, Donegal, the knives would be out. And we're just going to look at kickouts now. There was a subtle nuance on the kickouts, wasn't there? Talk us through that. And it's
absolutely. Now there's a table here. I'm not going to share it because it's very numbery. But I'm just going to read off it myself as we go. And it's really interesting because if we look straight off, Cork had 20 kickouts. They won 18, lost 2. Meath had 25 kickouts, won 16, lost 9. Now, generally speaking, a 50-50 football game, that should be enough to make it an 85-15 or an 80-20 for the team who are essentially getting hands on ball. But what's really fascinating about this, when you break the kickouts down, you're going to see, and I'm going to put up a chart here, if you can bear with me a moment. So I've got the kickout map here, and you're going to see this is Cork's kickouts. And look, I'm not giving away any trade secrets on Kevin Walsh. I won't go into the nuance of it. But anyone in Galway, even Paddy Tally, would have taken Tyrone or to Downs, afterwards. You see where Cork's kickouts have gone. And that was a tactic that Galway brought in to beat Kerry's high press in the Super 8 2018. And it worked brilliantly because you load the field on one side. A lot of nuance inside because you see there's 10 have landed there and Cork have won 8. And that's not a coincidence. I wouldn't expect them to win 8 every week, but I'd expect them to win maybe 60%, if not 70% every week. There's a lot of nuance in the movement and the bodies in there. But ultimately, what's really intriguing on this is you see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 kicks inside the 45, 1 just outside it. You would probably imagine the ones they won long was where the value was at because you're further down the field, better chance for a quick transition. But what's really noteworthy here And I'm going to read off the table here. When we look at Cork's short kickouts, and again, this augurs well for them going forward. If we look at those 10 kickouts that they got off short, they scored 6 points, and that's really, really high. Again, Dublin in their heyday would have been hitting 5 out of 10 on average. Galway, say in 2018, would have been hitting 4.5 maybe. So for Cork to have scored 6 points from 10 short kickouts is really, really impressive. And I'll just, as I look here, notably none of those were quick transitions. So that's 10 times Meath said, "Come on, break us down," and 6 out of 10 they did. So going forward, that's gold. And equally for Meath, which I wouldn't have expected, from 9 short kickouts, Meath scored one. From 9 that they won, they scored 1-4. So look, they're phenomenal figures for both sides. And the expected score for Meath was 5.6 points per 10. The expected score for Cork, 5.6 points per 10. For Meath, 3.9 points per 10. But both of those are really, Cork's figures phenomenal, really. Meath's is extremely good. But there's a real nuance here, because when we look at the long kickouts that Cork have won, and bearing in mind, they've kind of set up this weighted field and won a lot. They've won 8 and they've lost 2. They scored 2 points from those 8, which is significantly lower. That's 25% compared to 60% on the short, which seems completely counterintuitive. But what you see happens here, and I'll have better diagrams on this in the following weeks. But when you see those green dots out to the wing, you win the ball there. It's all well and good for beating a high press. Not that Meath brought a high press as such. It's great. But the problem is, with the ball going out to the wing there, it puts a man, say, on the halfway line or just behind it, in a position to get back and filter very quickly. And what you often find is the team win the kick out. They get excited at the prospect of the quick transition, fall in love with it, and either try to break through the other fielders or try and kick it in where you're probably outnumbered. And there was 1 or 2 key turnovers on Cork after they won those long kicks. And what's really intriguing here is, and it's a key stat I'll talk about, I think one of the maybe big gaps in a lot of modern analysts, they only count the first possession of who won the kick out. For me, the real actuarial mathematical value is the first phase each, or the outcome of that play. And what's really fascinating, and this is your key figure, if we look at the first possession each, so when Cork went to the half back line or full back line, they scored 6 points. Now, they conceded 1-1 in the turnover, so they ultimately only profited 2 points per 10 kickouts. Still not bad, anything above 2 is okay. But when we look at those long kickouts, they've scored 2. Of the 2 they lost, ironically, they scored at the turnover. So they've ended up with 4 scores off kicking long, but they've conceded 4 on the turnover when they lost them. So ultimately, counting the first phase each, Cork have actually nearly tripped themselves up when they won those long kickouts to the weighted field, which is probably food for thought going forward. And it's something I'd have played around with a little bit as well after Kevin Walsh, and it's something I was very in love with for a period. I think it has a purpose against the high press. Maybe they thought Cork come with a high press, but it's something they set their stall out for the first game against Meath, who traditionally don't high press. It's noteworthy, but ultimately, if they got hands of ball in the full back line every time, they'd have been better off.
Okay, sure. So Meath come away with the 2 points. Any final thoughts on it overall? Cork will be disgusted, won't they?
I think they will, and especially when you've got Dublin and Derry in that division, it really was a key game for both teams. They'll be disgusted, but look, Rome wasn't built in a day. I look at those turnovers, again, I presume it was coached. Kevin Walsh used to the goal, we used to play a lot of 45-degree angles. That Cork team thought they ran the straight lines a lot, and that's what caused a couple of those turnovers for that point in the second quarter, and the goal around 52 minutes. Bit more angled runs, I'm sure it'll be worked on. Look, you'd be delighted if you're Meath. You came away with the win, ultimately playing your kicking game. Cork, only that you probably can't afford to lose that game. You'd probably say, listen, ran away from us, but generally speaking, the parameters were good.
Yeah, okay. Fair enough. No doubt we'll be covering both these counties and much more as the season progresses. Okay, pulsating draw in Castlebar on Saturday night. Galway versus Mayo. It had almost a championship feel to it, didn't it? And I suppose a lot of that comes down to the more condensed season that we have now, and teams just want to get up and running. Eamon McGee was actually with me yesterday on commentary on local radio, and he actually made the point there's no such thing anymore as putting on that stone or two at Christmas, because it has that. But it did have that almost do or die feel to it, didn't it, Stephen? Yeah, it was only the first game.
Maybe I was too busy trying to get my software in order to analyse live. I didn't get that sense myself. Look, it's Galway Mayo. It's I'll say the Everton Liverpool. It's an amicable but hearty rivalry. So it's always there. Castlebar is a great venue, and obviously the key thing there, you have a new management team in Mayo, and there's always
the crowd. I suppose the crowd as well. There was 14
and the Mayo. I don't think. Yeah, and the Mayo crowd are brilliant. I mean, from a Galway perspective, and I sort of have a bit of maroon and white in me at this stage. Obviously, it's the big rival, but I love the Mayo supporters, and you go to Castlebar, and it's just magic, even in a league game. Obviously, and I suppose look, no more than Paddy Carr there yesterday. When it's your first game, it's bigger than the 2 points. That's just the way it is, emotionally for you, psychologically for the county. So maybe that was coming into it there from Kevin McStay and the new backroom team. Probably, I don't know. I would sense if I was in Paul Joyce's shoes, it wasn't as important. But it's still 2 points, and it's still Galway Mayo. So as I say, maybe I was emotion detached, trying to get the laptop in order 30 seconds before throw-in.
Yeah, I think it's just been devoid of, proper meaningful games. Maybe I'm getting a little bit carried away. I know you want to look at Galway getting off a lot more shots than Mayo, particularly in the early stages, Stephen.
Sorry, vice versa. Yeah, it was actually Mayo. We'll start again. We'll look at the expected score chart here, and we'll see here. Look, ultimately it was a close enough game. Galway probably a little bit lucky to go in ahead at half time. Mayo would shot more or less bang on expected score. Galway were 2 points ahead of it, which is more or less accounted for by the fact that it was a point shot that dropped short at Matthew Tierney, sort of Maradona style, flicked into the net. So that would account for that. If that ball goes over the bar, they're going in level at half time. Second half, Mayo probably had a slightly better share of it, but shot just under expected score. And you see that there, that you've got the table there. I'll put it in numerical terms here now.
Our bigger line, just for our viewers, our bigger line is the actual score, and the skinnier one, the slimmer one, that's expected score, isn't it?
That's right. Sorry, Pat, again, I'm so used to looking at these, I forgot to explain that. Yes. So the thicker line there is the actual score. So you can see there, it's 8-6 to Galway at half time. That's 1-5 to 1-3. All things being equal, it probably should have been 6 points to 1-3. As I say, as the game went on, basically Mayo scored a brilliant goal, which is why they're a point above expected score. Sorry, Mayo are a point above expected score. I have a couple of dots here covering the top corner of me. Mayo scored a point above expected score, which is accounted for over and above by a brilliant goal, which was probably a 30% shot at best that went in. So ultimately Mayo shot marginally below expected score. And that is, look, over the course of 5 years in random games, I stand to be corrected if the last 2 years have been different. Mayo have generally shot under expected score in the games I've analysed. And that's maybe more 3-4 years ago than currently. But they were probably, bar the goal shot, a half a point below expected score. Galway, you can see there, are 1, 2, 3 and a third, maybe 3 above. That's accounted for by the fact they 2 goal shots and they put both of them in net, and one of them shouldn't really have come if they'd gone over the bar. One against Sean Kelly, it's a tough shot. That's a 50% at best. So look, ultimately it was the goals. I would have said one today for Galway until they were pegged back in injury time. What's really fascinating on this, if we look again, and it's interesting, it is sorry, I'm after putting the wrong metric in there. So I'll leave it out. I put in the All-Ireland final, which I was playing around with before the game. But the figures there are interesting because Galway only got shots, and if I'm not mistaken, I had it in front of me not long ago. Galway only got shots off of 46% of phases, whereas Mayo. I'm actually going to get it up. Sorry, on the screen. The best laid plans. Apologies. The best laid plans there. I'm just going to go through this.
I know. Yeah, you get that up because I'm just thinking. Despite all of that, though, both sides then on reflection will definitely take a lot of positives from what you're saying.
Well, look, you will. Look, to go through it, look, Galway got shots off of 44% a shot. In Division 1 football nowadays, that's really low. Mayo 61%, which is, it's okay, it's decent, it's not amazing. Again, not unlike Cork and Meath, Galway, because they're kicking a lot of ball in, the expected score per shot is 68%, which is up near that golden 70. So ultimately, look at an expected score per 10 phases of 3.5 for Mayo and 3.2 for Galway. But all things being equal, it was the goals won today for Galway, or got the draw for Galway in an analytical sense. I suppose there was a point I wanted to make on that, and it is interesting because obviously since when I was involved in Galway, and there wasn't a huge amount of kicking ball in, which we'll chat about again. Pádraig Joyce, certainly in the first 2 years, was ultra offensive about kicking and whatnot. Probably gone to more of a middle ground now, but Damien Comer caught 2 outrageous marks in the first half. And again, I'm always conscious, and probably what got me into the analysis in the first place is human perception. And you can come away, and it was said to me watching the game on TV at halftime, why aren't Galway kicking it into Comer more? But they forget that there were 2 or 3 kicked in that were turned over. And actually, ultimately, Galway tried to play, and again, because I was chasing my tail, I didn't get through the full game. The first half, Galway kicked in 6, 5 kind of mark attempts, 1 more down the line, and 4 were turned over. So it's still only 33% score ratio. So that sort of play probably accounts for the lower phase of possession to shot ratio, but the higher expected score per shot. Because obviously when Damien catches those 20 yards from goal or 95, 96% shots. So that in itself for me was intriguing. Probably a little bit of naivety there. 1 or 2 balls, some of the lads that aren't seasoned players trying to take ball down what fake spaces, hockey calls it down the sideline. Probably a little bit of that as well. But ultimately, look, I think Galway will be happy enough. Again, I would be looking at that. I would see a bit of a concern at such a low phase of possession to shot ratio. And even going back to the All-Ireland final, Galway shot well above expected score. I should say Shane Walsh did. It was quite low in that game as well, which is worth noting. Obviously, when you get the brilliant ball in, you may get goals off it. But on the whole, it's a lower phase of possession to shot ratio than you'd expect at that level. But ultimately, they were winning with a minute left. Got a draw away from home, and probably a good point for both teams, because while I don't think either will, you never know if you get dragged into a relegation playoff, and a point against either of those respective sides will go a long way when it comes to it.
Yeah, that was kind of probably it's a better way of phrasing it. Was despite that low phase percentage, etc. That's kind of they still came out. Maybe positives was the right word, but it manifested itself into a positive in that there's a huge vacuum there for both sides to actually work on, but they've come away with a draw. It's morphed into a draw. Had it been a loss, it's a point less, And
absolutely,
it's the first game, as you rightly said, it can be almost symbolic getting the victory, even with Donegal yesterday against Kerry, more so than the metric of actually 2 points, if you know what I mean.
Oh yeah, and even in the league game, and both teams are missing, a number of significant players. Obviously, Shane Walsh jumps out at you there the way he's played the last 12 months. So it's still partial shadow boxing. But obviously, yeah, it's Galway Mayo, and it's the first game in the league. And as I say, it's a tricky league. There's no easy game there. So like a point each, if either of the teams have a few bad results, that point is probably what will guarantee that you'll stay in Division 1. But as I say, I don't expect either of those teams to be down there. But if they do, But again, just going back to that metric, and again, a key metric I always look at is what did you score off, your short kickouts, because you could come up against a team, say, go on, have the kickouts, break us down. And again, in that regard, both sides have a really positive to look at here, which is that Galway got off 5 short kickouts and scored 1-2, with an expected score of 0.5 or 5 points from every 10. And Mayo got off 3 short kickouts and they scored 3 points. And that's something that Mayo traditionally, I'd have said to teams, you can let Mayo have the kick out. There's probably more value in letting them have the kick out than the risk of going to O'Shea over the top. And they love that, maybe Lee Keegan or whoever else off the shoulder. That's how Mayo want to play football. But if you don't let them play that football, traditionally Mayo were a team who statistically really struggled breaking down blanket defenses. Your acid test being your short kickouts, didn't get a quick transition, but they've had 5 there and they scored 3 points. So if I'm looking at it from an analytical point of view, it's a really small sample size. Let's see 3, 4, 5 games down the road where they're at. But as a starter, that's definitely an impressive sign for Mayo.
Yeah, it does feel, or is it a myth, that they do need a million chances? I know we all hate the cliches and there's various ones just thrown around for the sake of it and they can be lazy. It does feel at times they need a couple of million chances to actually go on and win a game, because they do so many things right, don't they, in other areas of the field?
They do, and listen, they play it off the game. I mean, I have a training game that, look, I picked it straight up for Stephen Rochford. I had him at a club training session a couple of years ago. We call it the Mayo game, down with the club in Carlow. And look, the dynamics of the game, you have to run off the shoulder. You can't go backwards. You have to play at 45 degrees. You have to kick the ball forward. You have to be off the shoulder of the runner. And when it works well in training, it's beautiful. Obviously, when it falls down, it's a disaster. And Mayo are good enough that they can do it. But traditionally, look, again, I need to go back on figures from the last 2 years. I haven't had reason to do much on Mayo in the last 2 years, but certainly going back to 18 and 19, they did consistently shoot below expected score. And it was a point I used to make to Galway. If Mayo hit expected score or above on a day, we could get a swift, sharp shock here. And in the backdoor game in Limerick, they did. And that was crucially the one knockout game the two teams had played in Donkey's years. So that was key, But listen, we promised ourselves we keep to our time. I'm conscious before we will. But there's one really key point there, and I'm going to add in this table here. You may or may not be able to see it, but there's a real nuance here. Again, if I'm looking at this from a Galway point of view, I'm looking here at where our scores came from, and I won't go through them all. Pause it there if you want to have a look yourself. But we're gonna see. I put up the wrong one again. I'm in love with the Galway Kerry All-Ireland final. I actually just put those. I had those as a reference point, Paddy. And I'm after putting the wrong ones up, but I have the right one. I do have the right one here, Paddy. So you see here, sorry. So Galway, there's been 20 turnovers. Galway have got 20 possessions off turnovers. And they've only got 6 shots from that, which is interesting. And I'm going to leave that as an open-ended question because I'm conscious of the clock. And they've scored, look, they still scored 1-4, so they've still got a nice bit of scores off it. But ultimately, they've only got 6 shots from 20 turnovers. Whereas if we look here, Mayo have got 19 turnovers and they've got 12 shots off on those. So that's notable. And it was a figure I picked out in the All-Ireland final. And I didn't have to go through the reasons for this because Maurice Brosnan in the Examiner did a superb article on it. But if we look at the All-Ireland final, now firstly, Galway only got 11 balls off turnover because Kerry didn't give much ball away, but Galway only got 3 shots off from those 11 turnovers and 2 points. They scored 80% of their turnovers against Kerry. But look the other way around again. There's a pattern emerging here. The reasons why we know from a Kerry point of view because of that article Maurice did, but Kerry got 16 balls off turnovers, 12 shots, 8 points. And I suppose if I was looking at that from a Galway point of view, I'd be thinking Sam Allardyce. Sam Allardyce was huge on the first 2 seconds after you lose the ball. And probably not technically as good a coach as a lot of guys who he was boxing above the weight level, but he was a mathematician. And they're not always great crack, but they can come out with some great outcomes. For me, I'm asking, that's a pattern of 2 games running. Obviously, Kerry fouled brilliantly, cynically in the first in the final. There's a great article in the Examiner. I don't know if it's online. I presume it is. Will explain that. But ultimately, I'm looking at a pattern where Galway aren't turning turnovers into shots and they're conceding a heap of shots and scores off their own turnovers. And for me, from a Galway point of view, that's the key metric that stands out in their last 2 games, All-Ireland final and start of the National League.
Stephen O'Mara, the Sam Allardyce of the GAA analytical world. I'm sorry, he's the only manager I just have to turn off when he's talking. But I know we're stuck for time, but any more takeaways, or are we done and dusted with this one, Stephen?
Yeah, I think, look, they're the key points. You could talk for hours. The boys in Tinner Island down in Carlow, I could talk for hours. Yeah, listen, they're the key points. As I say, look, I'll try and simplify it a bit more next week with some more visuals. Just lost it with the programmer. He's working around the clock at the moment trying to update. But yeah, no, listen, I think nobody can be too disappointed. Cork, obviously, the result is bad. Is bad from the points point of view. But I really liked what I saw. I think, you know, a year and there, even 3 months, I think they're going to be more polished outfit again. Meath came away with the points, played their kicking game, ultimately got the scores when they mattered. Mayo, Galway, yeah, concerned there for Galway, but ultimately, look, they're motoring fine for the players are missing for now. And again, Mayo, yeah, shooting in around expected score. It's certainly an improvement, albeit as 1 game off what I would have been looking at 3-4 years ago.
Okay, fair enough. Our maiden voyage here has come to an end on the Square D GAA Tactics and Analysis podcast, and Stephen will be firing these out every single week during the National Football League and, of course, the 2023 Championship. Stephen, we will be on air here once again next Monday.
Looking forward to it, Paddy.
Good stuff. Rome wasn't built in a day, and I think the old Chinese saying, isn't it? Every long journey begins with one short step. Thank you so much to all our listeners and all our viewers. As we both said many times, we will be back next Monday. And later on, keep an eye on wherever you get your podcasts or on the various social media platforms. As the week progresses, we will be closer to seeing what 2 matches we're going to cover this weekend. But it will be 2 live television matches. So from Paddy McGill and Stephen O'Mara, bye for now. And we'll talk to you next Monday.